Science 10. Today's lesson will be on 9.1 and 9.2, all about plants. So we'll look at leaves to start with in 9.1 and all the jobs that leaves do, like exchanging oxygen and carbon dioxide, depends if they're doing cellular respiration or photosynthesis, releasing water, which you may know is called transpiration, the layers that protect leaves, the whole photosynthesis process that's so important in making themselves food and us food, because we either eat plants or things that eat plants, so that's our entire sustenance, as well how the vascular tissue transports water and nutrients through little tubes called phloem and xylem, so we'll examine that as well. So cells, just in general in living things, are the basic units of all life, as we studied in chapter 7. And groups of cells that do the same thing are called tissues. They will be organized into organs that have major jobs in the body and systems that are complex, entire formations of things like digestion and excretion and respiration. So there's our examples. In a plant cell, we could look at what structures it has. Remember, chloroplasts and cell walls. And groups of those cells could be something like a layer, outer layer of a cell called the epidermis. And they would be put together into organs and put together into systems. And organs could be examples here of root stems and leaves. And systems could be something like the vascular system, which transports all of the food or oxygen in the plant. So multicellular organism like you has tissues, organs, and systems, whereas a single-celled organism does all its functions using just its organelles, because it only has one cell. So that's the answer right there. Okay, so some specialized cells that we'd find in plants would be all of these parts found in leaves, which we'll talk about in a minute here. And in animals, some specialized cells would be things like skin cells, nerve cells, blood cells, muscle cells, that all are specialized to do certain functions. So photosynthesis, as you recall, I'm sure you've heard of it many times, how plant can use sunlight using its chlorophyll. It can change its gases like carbon dioxide and water into glucose. It's food for itself, and of course it releases oxygen as a waste gas, which we're very lucky for, because that is a gas that we need. So review of photosynthesis, you should know this, is that carbon dioxide and water using the sun can turn into oxygen and glucose. Now the food is stored and used by the plant, but it is also our source of energy when we consume plants for food. So cellular respiration is what happens in our bodies. Our cells use the food that we eat and turn that into carbon dioxide and water, and we can make energy out of this. So when we consume glucose, and that would be from eating plants or things that eat plants, also give us glucose sources, we release carbon dioxide and water, but we also release ATP energy. And so for every molecule of glucose, we actually make 36 molecules of ATP energy. So that is an important function of all the cells in our body. We continually need to eat food, to get that food delivered by the bloodstream to our cells, and our cells will 24/7 be doing cellular respiration to stay alive. Now, this formula is actually, as you notice, an actual opposite to photosynthesis. So you can see that what photosynthesis needs are the products that cellular respiration produces. And what photosynthesis produces is what our cellular respiration uses as reactants here. So we live very symbiotically with plants, and the reactions are exchanged. One thing you notice about plants, though, is that they will make food, but they will also do the opposite and do cellular respiration as well and break down their food and make energy for themselves. So they do both processes, photosynthesis and cellular respiration, whereas animal cells can only do cellular respiration and cannot make our own food, but we can break it down after eating it. So looking more closely at the leaf, we can see that there is the word epidermis, which means outer, and that would be the upper and lower surface of our leaf. That's an outer epidermal layer. That layer is protected by what you see here is kind of a brownish or yellowish, I don't know what color that is, peanut butter color, layer called the cuticle. And the cuticle is protecting the epidermis. It's clear, kind of waxy coating that is covering the epidermis. So in the epidermis, it's still a protective layer. And you see that there's like upper and lower epidermis. So we have one on the outer leaf. We call it the upper epidermis in the outer leaf, and we'd call it the lower epidermis on the underside of a leaf. So both upper and on the top and on the bottom of the leaf, we have this protective epidermis layer. Next, we have a palisade layer, which is this section right here, and that is more like column-shaped cells. They do have photosynthesis that they do, so they do have chlorophyll and they do photosynthesize. And next we have spongy tissue, which is loosely packed layer of cells that also photosynthesize, and they have a lot of air spaces in them. And then we have guard cells, which are right here. They form the area that will open and close the spaces called stomata that will allow the exchange of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and water in and out of the leaf. So in that layer that would be under the leaf is the area where guard cells will, when they're full of water, and the plant is well watered, they will open the stomata so gases can exchange and water can leave, and that would be like the water that leaves a plant, which is transpiration. But if the plant is dry, typically the guard cells will close, so we're not losing water when the plant is dry. The other part inside the leaf is vascular tissue, and vascular tissue is a system of carrying food and water. So phloem carries food, and that would be something that is generally made up in the leaves and carried downwards. Phloem carried downwards. We're going to see more about this later. And xylem is what carries water. Now, water, when you water a plant, it can carry it up, and it will be typically carried up and transpired out, whereas the phloem is generally made in the leaves, carried down, and can be carried back up. So generally the phloem can be moving things both ways. So you can see here it says phloem carries the sugar that's made by photosynthesis in the leaves, carries it down, and then carries it back up when it needs that source of energy. So phloem is a two-way transportation, whereas xylem typically is just carried from the roots where you would water a plant, carry water up and out, and gets transpired out. And generally we have these little vascular tissue found in bundles. So there's some phloem and some xylem kind of packed in little bundles inside leaves and stems. So jobs here, phloem is for food, xylem is for water and nutrients. Phloem, as we mentioned, goes up and down, xylem just up. And both of them are found in roots, stems, and leaves. And that's basically the majority of what you need to know for phloem and xylem. Okay, 9.2 we're going to discuss as well today. And that's about gas exchange in the plant leaf, through the plant leaf. So the photosynthesis will happen in the chloroplast of plant cells. Remember, it's CO2 and H2O making glucose and oxygen using sun's energy. Whereas cellular respiration is where the glucose and oxygen is used up in order to make CO2 and H2O and ATP energy. So this will happen in the mitochondria. The chloroplast is for photosynthesis, mitochondria for cellular respiration. And of course, plants will do both of these processes. Our cells can only do cellular respiration. So gases move through those spongy layers. Gases move through and in and out of the cell through these stomata. And we'll talk about how those stomata work. Remember that they are under the underside of leaves where you find the stomata, which are the spaces, and the guard cells that will open and close to allow those stomata to exchange gases. So again, stomata found on the underside, and oxygen, CO2, and water are all moving through that little space. Remember, these are the guard cells on either side, and the stomata is the space. So air can come in, diffuse where it needs to go. That's either CO2 or oxygen, and it can also diffuse out. So lenticels. Lenticels are found on stems and roots, and they're these little white spots here, and they are little openings that will also allow oxygen and CO2 to move through. So we have stomata underneath leaves, but on stems and roots we have lenticels, so that even if the tree has a bark, it still has tiny little lenticels, which are tiny little openings even on barks. So the word transpiration, you should know, is the evaporation of water through that leaf. And if you put a bag over a plant, you'll see it getting misty pretty quickly. And that's the transpiration, evidence of transpiration. And it basically says 99% of water eventually is transpired, so it has to continue being watered. And so guard cells, these again on the outside of the stomata, will close when the plant is dry, and they will be full of water and open up. If the plant is full of water, it'll open up, so it'll allow transpiration. And so the open stomata will typically open again with high water pressure. What you should know is the term for that. It's called turgor pressure. Turgor pressure is when water fills the guard cells, and that would be like this picture. If it's full of water, the guard cells here get full of water and open, so it allows water to leave the plant if it's very full of water, which makes sense. If it's dry and needs to conserve water, then our guard cells will be closed. And so here's some pictures of open and closed stomata. Remember, the stomata is the space. Guard cells are the ones controlling that. Okay, so it mentions here that light triggers the process of water going into the guard cell, which makes sense because if there's a lot of sunlight, it could also mean the plant could dry out. So if there is light, potassium goes into the guard cell, water follows that potassium by osmosis, tries to go in and dilute something that's full of salts, and then the guard cells will fill up with water, and the turgor pressure will open the stomata. So in times of bright light, we will have oops, I just drew that on the wrong one. In the times of light, we'll have those stomata actually close. So that is this one. And then we have our light triggering. Okay, sorry. It says that the sunlight will actually allow the opening of the guard cells. So I think I wrote something wrong there. Anyways, so when the water moves in, we've got high turgor pressure, stomata open. If the water is all gone, then we're going to have, when the transpiration has continued for a while, the plant dries up and it closes the stomata so it doesn't lose any more of its water. Okay, last point here is that this is extra information. These cam plants, they're just crassulacean acid metabolism plants that are found in desert plants. This is just extra information that they grow in dry environments. That means that in the daytime, their stomata are closed because it's so dry. So that's going to be a trouble with for them getting carbon dioxide in. So the mechanism they have is that they can store their carbon dioxide as an organic acid. And that means that if they've stored carbon dioxide as a carbon compound, as an acid, then they can use that whenever they need to do photosynthesis, even if their stomata are closed and they can't get CO2 in. So it's just a mechanism for plants in dry environments to still photosynthesize with this process. And then the wilting, of course, if the plant is really dry and it's lost turgor pressure, you'll see that it's flopping over and wilted. And all you need to do, of course, is water that plant, and turgor pressure will be renewed, and it will get firm again. And unless it's dead and you didn't water it for too long of a time. But here's a neat time lapse you can take a look at here. And so the stomata can have those guard cells can fill with water again, and they can fill up there in the cell. That giant vacuole can get full of water, and that's going to give it turgor pressure, and plant will stand straight up and be healthy again. Alrighty, this is our 9.1 and 9.2 lessons. I will say see you later.